Hi, this is Andrea Jones, the Access to Capital lead on SVB's Access to Innovation team. As the financial partner of the innovation economy, SVB is proud to sponsor Startup Grind and its important work to celebrate and empower female entrepreneurs and investors. At SVB, our mission is to increase our clients' probability of success. For nearly 40 years, we have provided innovators, enterprises, and investors the services they need to succeed, giving us unrivaled experience with startups, fast-growing tech, life science, and healthcare companies, and their investors. Our clients are the most innovative companies around the world, and they are tackling some of the world's biggest issues. SVB aims to be a catalyst for good in our sector by offering access to the innovation economy for all. We are proud to support organizations that are committed to accelerating diversity like Startup Grind, the Board List, Valence, and many, many others. Through SVB's Access to Innovation team, we are working to advance women, Black, and Latinx individuals to positions of influence within the innovation economy. The team works to 1. Increase the pipeline of diverse talent for our clients with powerful partnerships. 2. Connect diverse groups to SVB's vast network within the innovation economy. And 3. Unlock greater access to capital, professional relationships, and career opportunities. We know that diverse perspectives and inclusive environments ignite new ideas and power innovation. SVB is intentionally and strategically investing for a world where everyone can bring their bold ideas to life. We invite you to learn more about SVB and the Access to Innovation team at svb.com.
So I am excited to kick off our Founders Fundraising Summit with our first session from not one, but two former professional athletes. They'll be in discussion on the art of negotiation, taking the lessons that they've learned from the field and basketball courts to the boardroom and cap tables of startups. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome former WNBA champion Alana Beard, who is now the founder and CEO of Transition Play, a talent firm that specializes in helping female athletes live prolific lives across their personal, professional, and public domains beyond the game. Joining Alana in a fireside chat is Hunter Hillenmeyer, a former NFL linebacker with the Chicago Bears. He is previously a founder himself and currently a VC partner at Next Play Capital. Please join me in giving a fantastic Startup Grind virtual welcome to Alana and Hunter.
Hey everybody, you've got Hunter Hillenmeyer here. I'm a partner at Next Play Capital. Very excited to join you guys. And I'm joined on stage by the one and only Elena Beard. Elena, how are you doing? What's going on?
I'm good, Hunter. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Before we jump in, I got to sort of mention this full circle moment here, right? When I took on fellowships in my off season of the WNBA, but one of my first experiences with Startup Grind was during my fellowship with Next Play Capital. Got a chance to walk right down the street to join these events. I was like a kid in a candy shop. So to see this and to be a part of this, and it's just a full circle moment for me. So I'm excited to be here.
Well, I love that Next Play can claim some credit in that journey. For those who don't know, Next Play is a venture capital fund, but also fund of funds. And so the stakeholders in our community are our investors, our general partners at the funds we work with, but also many founders that we have relationships with through the funds we're invested in, but also through the direct investing that we do. A lot of Next Play's community of investors have roots in the sports world, team owners and athletes. And so in addition to having an LP GP relationship with a lot of funds or with a lot of athletes, we also do a lot of education. Elena mentioned our fellowship that she went through. And so it's especially fun for us to catch people that are at kind of an inflection point in their career. Maybe their professional sports career is kind of winding down and they're figuring out what their next mountain is. And Elena is a perfect example of that. I know you guys got a little bit of context in the intro there, but Elena is the all-time leading scorer at Duke, two-time Defensive Player of the Year in the WNBA. She's an investor. She's a founder. She sits on boards. So you've kind of got it all. And thank you for joining us. Our topic for today is broadly about negotiations. But I want to kind of take a step back from that and perhaps look at negotiations through the broader lens of advocacy, just putting your best foot forward to drive towards the best mutual outcome for you and whoever's on the other side of that table. Elena, in your career, you've sat at a lot of very important tables, whether that is in your career when you're a free agent and negotiating, or now as a public company board member, or with your own startup. I don't know if there's a particular moment of advocacy that jumps out the most, but we'd love for you to kind of take us inside the room and give us a couple examples of times where you've sat at that table and had, you know, the rub of a negotiation, but also the opportunity to find common ground.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess I would love to just start by taking a step back and just sort of, giving context in terms of how I got started. A lot of the stuff that you named outside of just on the court has happened within the last 2 to 2.5 years. It's been really, really fast paced, but that comes from me just being willing to step outside of my comfort zone, right? And understanding sort of the platform that I have as a former athlete, right? It was I retired from the WNBA after a 15-year career in January of 2020. And about a month after announcing that retirement, I transitioned to my then role as senior associate with Silicon Valley Bank Capital. And that opportunity came about because in 2010, I had a potential career-ending injury where the doctors literally, again, this was a no. The doctor said, hey, you know what? You have a 10% chance of returning to an elite level. And so it was in that moment that I just really started sort of thinking about life after the game and what that means and who I am sort of outside of the game of basketball. So I started just really digging in and preparing myself. And that meant just saying yes to pretty much every opportunity that would sort of build the capacity of just learning business outside of the game, right? And so that led to the fellowships, the internships, the one that we mentioned earlier with Next Play Capital. I was the first fellow for Next Play Capital. I want to take credit for that.
Trailblazer.
But then just through Next Play Capital, just, now being able to get into those rooms and which allowed me access to those tables. One of my first events with Next Play Capital was at the CES. I'm there. It's my first time there. Obviously, it's pretty overwhelming, but we had a hot happy hour event. And I walk into this room, and of course, I don't look like anyone in that room, right? I'm taller than everyone. I'm Black. I'm a woman. I'm an athlete. And so, of course, people are curious about sort of my story. And that led to sort of, meeting Mike Deschanel, president of SVB, and John Chino, who's the president of SVB Capital. And them hearing my story and my desire of wanting to sort of create sort of this bridge for female athletes to have the same opportunities that our male counterparts have sort of in the venture capital space. And so when you speak about sort of just advocating or being in a position of advocacy, I understand sort of the platform that I have. My responsibility is to be intentional about how I use that platform. And it's not about me. Right? It's about how I build for others. And that's where that desire has come from. And everything that I've done up until this point has been with others in mind, whether it's a foundation, whether it's Transition Play, which is a company I founded about a year ago, which is focused on sort of female athletes and making sure that they're prepared for their life after the game. And so, just to your point, and I'll reiterate again, it's about one, first understanding that you have a platform, and then two, understanding the responsibility that you have that comes with that.
I'd love to talk a little more about Transition Play because it really is kind of relevant to both of us. Each is former athletes that have had to go through that process of reinvention. And it's tough because, and I'm sure you can relate to this, nobody feels sorry for a pro athlete as they're completing their career. if it's gone well, you've made a lot of money, and that affords you the opportunity or freedom to be intentional about what you want to do next. But most athletes, they don't make nearly as much as the people who grab the headlines. So you have a lot of athletes that are leaving a game with maybe a little bit of savings, but not anything like the headline grabbing contracts that people read about. And most athletes play not as long of a career as they probably would have hoped or probably would have thought that they might have been able to do. And so you're losing this enormous part of what has made you for the first 20, 25, 30 years of your life. And you commit so much to this sort of singularity of that one purpose of being an athlete. Mm-hmm. And then you've got 50, 60, 70 more years of life to go kind of start at the ground floor and figure out what it is that you want to do. And so it's not that there's the need for sympathy there, but even as a person that went to Vanderbilt and Northwestern Business School, I was still 30 with no job experience. And that can be kind of a daunting, almost kind of imposter syndrome laden place to sit, as you then try to figure out, well, what am I good at besides being a linebacker in the NFL? And so I love that you're focusing specifically on that transition point. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing in the early days of creating transition play and how that's going.
Yeah, no, I mean, you hit on a ton of points, right? And it's clear that we have that in common as former athletes, right? I think I want to push back on something about making the money. I played in the WNBA, so that was very, very minimum. Yeah. And two, as you said, you never want anyone to sort of feel sorry for you. That's not what we're about. That's not how we've been able to sort of create or excel at an elite level with that mindset. But if I could sort of recall sort of my first moment stepping into sort of SVB Capital, remembering sort of one of my first meetings, walking into a boardroom of about 35 individuals. And clearly there's no one in that room that looks like me, right? Very few women, but let alone Black female sitting at that table. Obviously that's daunting. Imposter syndrome sets in big time, but I had choices in that moment. Right. I was at the table to just deciding what that meant and how I was going to use that moment. I could have easily just, walked away from that, but I understood sort of what that meant for me and then the others that I was sort of building for. But at the same time, my network and my sort of network of advisors and mentors are predominantly male. And the individuals that I was in search for at that time in that moment was not necessarily found. And so I decided to create the community that I was looking for, which is transition play, right? A community where we can all come together with similar lived experiences in mind, and sort of have the support and the safe space to ask the questions that you're afraid to ask when you're in a position of uncertainty or a new field. And so transition play is definitely a passion of mine, but it's also me understanding, and I've said this before, the responsibility that I have when I have the access, I have the network, and I have the opportunities. I want to share that. I think a lot of people go through their journeys and they, gain all of this knowledge, they gain that access, but they don't share it, or they pick and choose who they want to share it with. That's not how you grow. That's not how you evolve. And I 100% believe that we can all sort of build ourselves, we can all rise, but we can also lift as we're rising at the same time. And that's against all the sort of advice that I've received sort of starting out in my journey. I was told that get yourself settled first, and then you can help others. That worked counterintuitively for me.
Yeah, well, I love. So you joined Silicon Valley Bank's capital team, and then was there a moment in there where you realized that your, whether you want to call it calling or just the potential, the impact that you felt you were in a position to have, might be better suited on the founder side, specifically with transition play, but also just, there's a lot of people that kind of straddle the fence between the investor world and the founder world. And, maybe they're a founder, but they're also an angel investor, or they work at a fund, but they have a side hustle. And so I feel like there's probably a lot of people in our audience that have a foot in each of those worlds. I'm curious how you knew that your at least immediate future was more on the founder side when you moved over to start Transition Play.
Yeah, no, I think it was something that was always sort of in the back of my mind, right? Like, how do I sort of leverage everything that I have to build for, others? And I sound repetitive in saying that, but that's just how I think about things. I would say maybe 8 months in, my role with sort of SVB Capital, I had a chance to just really understand the nuances of the venture capital space. I engaged with a ton of people at a very high level, which was very beneficial to me. And so knowing what I felt in that moment after preparing the way that I prepared for the last 10 or 12 years, I knew if I felt what I always felt, I can imagine what other female athletes or athletes in general would feel when it's their time to make that transition. So how do I take all of this and sort of build a platform for others to, one, get a head start on sort of preparing for that. And so just to your point, I think it definitely happened about 8 months in. But yeah, it's a passion of mine. And that's what I decided to go after.
Oh, I love the notion. Part of what you shared there with describing Transition Play is to ask the questions that you're afraid to ask. The sort of there are no dumb questions mentality. That is extremely hard for people, especially when you come from being a perennial all-star and you kind of restarting in the mailroom in an area that you're not a domain expert. And there is humility in that process of reinvention. And I love the fact that part of your advice to others that are following in those same footsteps is to kind of be comfortable being uncomfortable and kind of check your ego in that process of transition. I want to segue a little bit just because I think it's so interesting, and I just want to hear what the latest update is. You have very publicly been tied as one of the leaders of the bid to bring a WNBA franchise to the Oakland area. How much of just the 100% of time you're able to put out there to the world in a week does that take up for you? And do you have any updates you can share with the group?
No, it's been such a hard but fun process, right? Do I have any updates? No. The announcement that happened maybe a year ago was something that I was really reluctant to do. But I knew that I had to do it because I don't necessarily have the capital or liquidity as others would have to pursue an opportunity like this. So that's the only reason why that became sort of public sort of knowledge. But within that, this process has taught me sort of a ton in terms of how to engage with people, how to, one, step outside of my comfort zone and now have to sell sort of my story, my journey, my strategy and vision has taken sort of a lot of work to sort of curate and to really sort of nail down. But that's something that I am proud of, now being at a point to where I have that and play. But yeah, so it's hard. It's unusual, I suppose, for someone like me to pursue sort of an ownership of a WNBA team when I don't necessarily have the traditional profile, right? And as we all know, that profile as sort of professional sports owners are predominantly male, predominantly white, predominantly someone who has a high level of liquidity. That's what I don't have. But what I do have is a passion, a network, and access to individuals who understand the importance and want to be a part of the sustainability and growth of female sports. So it's something that I'm super excited about. And that's just one of several things that I'm doing that requires sort of a fundraising event.
Well, I don't know if you're willing to divulge when you're probably still sort of midstream on it, but on the fundraising side as a founder, I'm sure you're getting to experience, we're not in a great market right now in terms of founder dynamics, especially relative to a couple of years ago when it seemed like any startup with just an ounce of product market fit was getting money thrown at them. Talk a little bit about how that experience has been. I know my first time as a founder, just the volume of meetings required to raise capital was overwhelming to me. I'm curious what your experience there has been like in these early days.
It's again, it's hard, it's challenging, but that's exactly why I love the process. I know that we're sort of here to sort of talk about the art of negotiation, and I've sort of written down like a few points in terms of how I allow this process to guide me. Again, it was a learning process, but I do believe that preparation is the key to sort of everything, right? When you're beginning to engage with these potential investors, having enough information on your end to not necessarily know everything about the potential investor, but to guide the conversation, I think is extremely important. I think there's a balance between sort of knowing a lot and then allowing information to come to you organically. And that kind of leads to sort of my second point in terms of how I approach sort of this I guess negotiation. So it's one, due diligence and preparation. Two, it's listening. I think a lot of people get caught up in wanting to tell their story, right? Wanting to get that potential investor sort of engaged in what they're doing. I think if you focus more, which is my third point, on sort of the relationship versus the outcome, is when you'll start to really generate a network of individuals who are open and wanting to support you organically. And so through that process, I have found that not just through that process, but just my process over the last 20 plus years, relationships mean more to me than any award, any championship, or anything that I've ever sort of received. Because making sure that you genuinely invest time in knowing the person that you want to allocate capital to you is important, because all money isn't good money. And I know that's cliche, but it's important to understand that. And I think sort of the fourth bullet to sort of how I approach it is, it's again counterintuitive, but I really never ask. I allow sort of the relationship to evolve to a point to where you want to help me because of who I am and the vision that I've, sort of set out.
Well, you're speaking to some of the ethos of Next Play. Two of our core values are diversity drives outperformance and relationships over transactions, especially when you have so many different things going on in the venture world. It can be easy as a fund of funds to focus on, let's get some money to work here and we're going to make a 3x investment in 1 year. But just that notion of looking at the long-term potential of relationships and the things that you can do as partners over, can I get this person to write me a check? I love that. I had 2 founders meetings just this morning, and one of them, he talked for 27 of the first 30 minutes, and he's a very smart young man with a lot of potential. But it was clear he was trying to show me how smart he was. And I didn't say this in an aggressive way at all, but so much, especially for early stage founders, is proving less that you've got it all figured out, but that you're curious enough to figure it out. Yeah. And like how, like almost proving that you're going to be a quick learner in the flaws in your business, which are inevitable, that you're going to be able to diagnose them and be honest with yourself about them and react to them quickly. And so I very much agree with you there, just in terms of, if we're kind of zooming out to any negotiating takeaways for the broader audience, so much of the themes that you have spoken on today are really kind of unique and authentic to you, exactly. Including the rooms that you are able to get into because of your unique background, but also on the other side of that coin, the fact that puts you in situations where you were maybe the only person from your background or that looked like you, and I think every founder, every fundraiser of any kind has those things that make them unique. And negotiating. I took a negotiating class in business school, but so much of the takeaway is that there isn't a playbook. No. Because what is the right way to do it for one person might not be the right way to do it for somebody else. And so I love that so much of what you've shared today has had to do with your story and the things that work for Elena and your journey, as opposed to just some sort of like in a box, like here's how you get the best outcome from whatever relationship you're meeting with today.
No, that's absolutely right. And as I was sort of thinking about and preparing for sort of this session, yes, I have my books, right? I read them. I dig into sort of the knowledge. One of them being Negotiation Genius is one book that is near and dear to me. But that's framework, that's information. But then I still have a way in terms of that I value in terms of how I approach relationships, right? I would say one of the toughest challenges transitioning from sports to the venture capital space is that I felt most of the relationships or the engagements were transactional. And that was very, very hard for me to sort of accept. And so that forced me to figure out what side of the fence I wanted to be on. But at the end of the day, you're going to always come back to your core of who you are and what's important to you. That's eventually going to guide sort of your next steps. You made a point sort of about sort of the founder who spoke for 27 minutes. And I get it, right? These guys are founders think that this is going to be their only shot. And it could very well be their only shot. But if I had to give any advice to anyone, it would just be patient, right? Be patient and enjoy that process of developing that relationship. If it doesn't happen, it wasn't meant to happen. If it continues and continues to grow, that was meant for you. So allow yourself to be open and willing to let go of things that's not necessarily meant for you in that moment, with the understanding that it could potentially come back to you just in a different form.
Yeah. Well, I want to kind of land the plane here, and I'm seeing a couple questions from the audience come up on the chat. So I will serve one up and then I'll maybe also chime in with a little bit of my own response. The first one I see here is, what are some of the skills you learned as an athlete that are serving you now in your entrepreneurial journey? And while you gather your thoughts, right, Next Play puts a ton of time and energy into thinking about that. And I just, as a guy who's now in my 40s, but is still close with Vanderbilt and Northwestern communities, and there's student athletes coming out of there every year that are not going to go pro and looking to figure out what to do with the rest of their lives. And I tell them some of the same things every time, which is a lot of the job specific things you need to learn, you're going to learn very quickly on the job, whether that's how to work a spreadsheet or how to sell the product. Those are learned skills. Right. The harder things to learn, like how to communicate, how to work hard under pressure, to be a part of a team. These are things that athletes have in spades. And so just as you might feel a little behind if you play a few years in the professional leagues and maybe you're 27 when you're coming out instead of 22 or 23, the deficit there is way more than made up for by the fact that you are hardworking and you've learned time management because you were a student athlete. And there's such a long list of things. If I worked at a company that needed hundreds of people, I would be all over trying to hire student athletes, because I don't think there's a group of people that have more self-selected, that they have the innate just kind of effort and communication and things like that sort of traits that correlate to success in any professional job. And so I hope that resonates with you. I'll kick it over to see what your response would have been to the same question.
You know, as you're talking, I'm like, Hunter, where were you when I was transitioning? But it's just like, these are the communities that you want. This is the community that we're building sort of through Transition Play. To be able to have sort of these shared sort of experiences means everything. And so the list that you kind of just like laid out is exactly the skills that I believe transfer, like for me, right? It's the collaboration, the communication, the teamwork, the the understanding that everyone has a role to play within the team, the focus, the discipline, like all of it is what I have figured out through this process, that these companies and corporations are paying hundreds and $1,000s to sort of instill and teach their team. But we as athletes sort of have that sort of naturally. And so to answer that question, like it's the skills of discipline, it's the skills of focus, it's the skills of completing the task at hand. It's the skill of knowing sort of, or being aware of who you are and knowing when it's your ego versus reality, like speaking. Like, I think that's like the main thing. But I think one of the challenges that I've had is just allowing myself to be vulnerable in the moment or in the space, right? That's been sort of the hardest thing, and it's a work in progress. I'm not going to act like I have it all together, because I don't. But yeah.
Well, Next Play has a podcast. I'll sneak a plug in there. But one of the most fascinating things of having done probably about half of those interviews, we probably interview a third founders, a third general partners at funds, and a third people from the sports world, athletes. And we end every interview with the same question, which is, how do you define excellence? And hearkening back to that question, what struck me is the single biggest takeaway when we're 50-something podcasts in is the similarity of the answers, especially between entrepreneurs and athletes. And so the wiring, when you're up against what can sometimes feel like impossible odds, to persevere in the face of that is definitely something that's shared in the DNA of entrepreneurs and athletes.
Absolutely.
Well, I know, Elena, we are up on time. Thank you so much. We love having you in the ecosystem and as a friend of Next Play, and we're fans of yours and very excited to see what the next decade has in store as well. And thanks to everybody at Startup Grind for including us in this awesome day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hunter. It was a pleasure.